Have you ever been alone in the woods at night with the unsettling feeling that you're not really alone? I thought I was just out for a quiet camping trip, just me and my brother. But then, something changed. We were miles away from the nearest person, tucked deep in the forest, when I saw it. A small flicker of light, far off in the distance, barely visible through the trees. At first, I thought it was nothing. But when I looked again, the light was closer. And then, there were figures, standing, just watching us. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But I wasn't alone. I never thought I'd have to run for my life in the middle of nowhere. So, what really happens in the woods when the fire dies out? And what was out there, waiting? Stay with me because the real nightmare has just begun. But before we start, don't forget to hit subscribe or follow so you'll never miss a spine-tingling episode. If you're enjoying our content, please give us a like, drop a comment, and share this video to help us reach 100 likes. Every like brings us one step closer to the next terrifying episode. And if you want even more creepy content, follow us on our social media platforms for the latest updates. Thank you all for being part of this journey with me. And now, let's dive into the darkness together. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, just me and my older brother, Ethan. He had been the one to choose the location, as usual. He was the planner, always researching the best spots. Me? I just tagged along. This time, though, he had picked a remote site on the rugged cliffs of the northern coast. The campsite was far from any other, requiring a good hike to reach it. It wasn't busy, which was a relief. The quiet solitude felt perfect. We settled into a relatively unclear site, surrounded by sparse trees and a patch of grass. There were a few random signs of past visitors, like trekking poles, an abandoned jacket, and a few worn-out boots scattered here and there. It was odd. It wasn't typical for people to leave so much behind in such a secluded area. But we didn't think too much of it. After all, it wasn't like it was dangerous, right? Ethan and I spent the day lounging around, chatting about anything and everything. When night fell, we lit a fire. The crackling flames provided warmth, but the chilly air still crept in around us. A couple of hours later, I noticed something out of place. Something far off in the trees behind Ethan. A flickering light. It wasn't the firelight from our camp. I nudged Ethan. "Do you see that?" He turned, squinting into the darkness. "What is that?" It was far off, nestled between the trees, and barely noticeable in the moonless night. A small campfire flickered faintly, like a tiny ember on the edge of the woods. The place was remote. There shouldn't have been anyone else out here. Maybe someone was camping further off, trying to keep to themselves. We shrugged it off and didn't think much more about it. We kept talking, snacking, and eventually wound down for bed. It was close to midnight when I finally fell asleep, only to be woken up sometime later by an urgent need to relieve myself. I groggily unzipped the tent and stumbled out into the dark night. I walked a bit further than usual, making sure I wouldn't attract any wildlife with my presence. As I finished, I glanced up, and that's when I saw it again, the distant flame. It was still burning, which I found a bit strange. Hadn't it been hours since we first noticed it? I stood there for a moment, too tired to think much of it, until my eyes began adjusting to the dark. It was then that I saw them. Far off, just beyond the trees, were figures, dark and unmoving. I froze, unsure if it was just the shadows playing tricks on me. I blinked. Number. It wasn't a bush or some odd-shaped rock. These were people, or at least I thought they were. They were standing perfectly still, spread out like they were waiting for something, or someone. Panic crept up my spine. I stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't look away. The figures remained there, each standing eerily still, watching me. I didn't dare approach them. My body was rooted to the spot, unable to move. I turned around and hurried back to the tent, barely able to breathe. I debated waking Ethan. What if I was just imagining it? But the feeling in my gut told me something was wrong. I woke him up, shaking his shoulder. "Ethan, something's out there," I whispered, panic thick in my voice. He rubbed his eyes, still half asleep. "What? What are you talking about?" "I saw figures in the woods. I swear there's something out there." Ethan looked at me, confused but not yet alarmed. I led him outside, hoping it was nothing. But when we reached the edge of the trees, I froze again. The figures weren't in the distance anymore. They were closer, much closer. They had moved. Now, they were scattered around us, silently standing between the trees, their dark silhouettes barely visible in the night. I could hear Ethan's breath hitch. "What the hell is this?" His voice was shaky, a rare thing for him. Ethan was always the brave one, the one who kept his cool. But now, I could see the terror in his eyes. It was a look I'd never seen before. I backed up slowly, and we both began retreating toward the tent. "Should we leave?" Ethan's voice trembled as he spoke. I nodded. We didn't even grab our stuff. We took only our car keys and wallets and fled down the trail, not daring to look back. The figures didn't follow us, but I knew in my gut that they were still watching us from the shadows. We made it to the car and drove away, adrenaline keeping us awake through the night. The next morning, we reported the strange events to the authorities. They didn't believe us, of course. How could they? No one would believe that a whole group of people had been out in the woods, standing silently and watching us like that. We didn't go back to that campsite, of course. And when we thought back on it, the scattered, forgotten items around the camp made us wonder. Had they really been abandoned, or were those belongings left on purpose? It didn't take long before we realized that we would never know the truth about that night. I'm a 17-year-old guy from Phoenix, Arizona, and this incident took place about 6 months ago. I had decided to go on an overnight trip into the Superstition Mountains, located just an hour's drive east of Phoenix. Now, I won't name the exact trail I took because, after a few past experiences, I've learned better than to post specific details about remote places online. Whenever someone finds out about a great trail or abandoned mine, they usually end up trashing the place and blasting loud music. So, let's just leave it at that. The trail I chose was an 8-mile loop through a narrow canyon. It was meant to be a straightforward one-night trip. I had initially planned to go with a friend, but at the last minute, he canceled. So, I decided to go solo. With my backpack packed and my car ready, I headed out alone. I didn't get to the trailhead until about 5:45 p.m., which was pretty late. For those who don't backpack much, let me tell you, this is a huge mistake. I had about 4 miles of hiking to do before I reached my planned campsite, and it was getting dark fast. My goal was to cover at least 2 to 3 miles before I had to start looking for a spot to set up camp. It was an ambitious plan, especially considering how isolated the trail was. Hiking alone in the dark, with nothing but a headlamp and the sound of the wind in the trees, is nerve-wracking, especially in a place like the Superstitions. Eventually, the darkness took over completely. All I could see was what my headlamp illuminated. I figured it was time to stop and set up camp. In the dim light, I found a less than ideal spot, but it would have to do. There were remnants of a previous fire, burnt wood, and the remains of a fire ring, so I assumed someone had camped here recently. My first priority was to get a fire going. I managed to gather some dry wood and started a small fire. After that, I set up my tarp and cracked open a can of chili mac. Things were starting to feel all right. The nerves from the hike were almost gone, but there was still an underlying sense of unease. To understand what happened next, you need to know how I set up my camp. The site was a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees, with the trail about 30 feet to my left. When you're sitting by a campfire, it creates a circle of light around it, and beyond that circle, everything is pitch black. That's how I found myself sitting near the fire, eating dinner, when something small and unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, a rock, no bigger than a marble, landed in my camp. I froze, staring at it. I was absolutely sure I was the only person on this trail that night. Confused and a bit shaken, I turned on my headlamp and scanned the area around me, but the dense pines and underbrush limited my vision to only about 10 feet. I spent the next 15 minutes in disbelief, eyes darting around, trying to find whoever or whatever had thrown the rock. But there was nothing. Just the quiet, dark woods. After a while, I convinced myself that I must have kicked the rock by accident, or that it had fallen from a tree. It didn't make sense, but I was so tired that I let my guard down a little. I went to sleep, trying to brush off the strange occurrence. But that was the moment when the true terror began. I woke up in the middle of the night to the soft sound of rustling leaves. It was so faint that, if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't hear it. But I was listening. Slowly, the sound grew louder, and I realized someone, or something, was moving around my camp. My heart raced as I grabbed my flashlight, but the panic hit when I realized it was no longer where I had left it. The flashlight, which had been sitting next to me when I fell asleep, was gone. I stood up in a panic, clutching my knife with one hand and peering into the darkness. The flashlight was lying in a pile of leaves, about 15 feet away from me, on the edge of the tree line. I couldn't breathe. At that moment, I felt a wave of pure dread. Whoever had taken it was close. Maybe they were watching me, waiting. I had two choices: stay in my camp, try to wait out the night, or attempt a hike back to the car in complete darkness, which would put me at a massive disadvantage. I decided to stay at the camp. If someone was out there, I figured they'd have the upper hand if I was out on the trail without a light. So, I huddled in my tarp, knife clenched tightly in my hand, and waited. Hours passed, and the rustling returned. I could hear faint footsteps in the woods, sometimes too far to hear clearly, but always returning after a while. The sound was distant at first, almost casual, like someone taking a leisurely stroll through the forest, not a care in the world. But then, after several hours, it started getting closer and closer, until it was only about 7 feet away from me. The fire had burned low by now, and the footsteps seemed to stop just beyond the reach of my light. For what felt like an eternity, the world around me went completely still. It was silent. No wind, no animals. I sat there, clutching my knife, praying that nothing would happen. I didn't dare move. Eventually, the first light of dawn began to break through the trees. That's when I realized whoever or whatever had been circling my camp was gone. I waited just a little longer, then quickly packed up my things and made my way back to the trail. I didn't stop until I reached my car, which felt like an oasis of safety. I jumped into my Subaru and drove away as fast as I could, not stopping until I had put at least 20 miles between me and that place. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched the entire way. The paranoia lingered, but when I stopped at a gas station in Apache Junction to grab a Red Bull, I noticed something odd. There was something written on the back window of my car. Sleep well. A chill ran down my spine. I've had some strange experiences during my adventures around Arizona, but nothing compares to that night in the Superstition Mountains. There's definitely something, or someone, out there. If you ever find yourself thinking about hiking those mountains, my advice? Stay as far away as possible. Six months ago, I relocated to northeastern Washington for work. And with the Blue Mountains practically right in my backyard, I was eager to explore the land before the next hunting season started. As an experienced hunter, I knew that if I wanted to avoid the crowds of weekend enthusiasts, I'd have to venture deep into the wilderness, far from the familiar trails and public access roads. I'd been raised on a farm in Montana, where I spent most of my youth outside, tending to livestock and learning the land. By the time I was 10, I had already perfected my animal calls. I could mimic everything from coyotes to elk, rodents to bulls. This wasn't to brag, just laying the groundwork. I knew my way around the wild. I knew animal sounds, their cadence, and rhythms. That's why when I heard something that night, I knew right away it wasn't something I'd ever heard before. I'd left a bit later than planned, so by the time I reached the Blue Mountains, it was already late afternoon. It wasn't a huge issue, though. Most animal activity happens at dusk or dawn, and I just needed a few miles between myself and the nearest road. After a couple of hours of hiking, I found a small, flat spot at the top of a ridge, perfect for spotting game. As the sun set, I saw only a few white tails flickering in the distance. Deciding to keep things simple, I set up camp, deciding on a dry bivy sack with no fire, planning for an early start the next morning. But as I lay there in the dark, something felt off. The mountains were unnervingly quiet. I didn't like it. The usual sounds of night, distant rustlings, animals moving through the brush, were gone. And then, just as I began to drift into sleep, it hit. A sharp, searing headache shot through my skull, waves of pain crashing relentlessly. It wasn't dehydration, as I was meticulous about staying hydrated during my hikes. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to ride it out. But then I heard it. A strange, hollow sound drifting down the mountainside above me. It wasn't an animal call, it was something else. Something large, resonant, and repetitive. I froze. My headache momentarily forgotten, I tried to convince myself it was just an unfamiliar bird call, maybe a species I hadn't encountered before. But my gut screamed that this wasn't right. The sound stayed in the same place, echoing across the mountainside. It was too close. By 2 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. The pain in my head was unbearable, and the call, whatever it was driving me insane. I needed to leave. I decided to pack up and head down the mountain. The trail I'd come in on was steep and rough, but I remembered a nearby gated road just above my camp. It circled back to the main road where my truck was parked. The longer route was easier to navigate in the dark, and it would take me closer to the source of the strange noise. As I began walking, the sound followed me. At first, it was faint, barely audible through the trees, but it was there, always just a little higher up on the mountainside, matching my pace. Every snap of a twig underfoot, every rustle of leaves made my heart race. It never faltered. It kept up with me. But that was the thing. I couldn't see it. Whatever it was, it stayed out of sight on purpose, and that terrified me more than anything else. The headache intensified as I moved quickly down the road, and my breathing became erratic. My vision blurred, and my body felt like it was failing me. Could this be altitude sickness? Maybe. But it didn't feel right. I stumbled down the trail, and as I descended below the tree line, something strange happened. The pain stopped. Just like that. As soon as I reached the lower altitude, the crushing headache vanished, but the feeling of being watched didn't. I made it back to my truck just before dawn, exhausted and shaken. My body was weak, my mind racing. That night had changed something in me. Even when I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling. I spent hours on my computer, trying to find any explanation for the sound I had heard. I listened to various animal calls, bird calls, but nothing came close. Then, almost by accident, I typed in "Bigfoot call," and there it was. The exact same sound. My blood ran cold as I listened to the recording. It was the same hollow, rhythmic noise that had echoed through the mountains that night. I've never believed in Bigfoot. Never. But I know what I heard. And I know I never heard it again. Not even after returning to that same spot. I walked the same thick, tangled slopes where the sound had come from, but it was gone. Or was it? Since that night, I've never hunted that deep in the mountains alone. Whatever was up there wasn't an animal, and it wasn't human, but it was there, watching, waiting, and I'm certain it didn't plan on letting me leave. If you've made it to the end of this video, let me know in the comments which story creeped you out the most, and if you could survive only one of these stories, which one would it be? Also, drop "I made it" and mention our channel in the comments below. I want to know who my loyal followers are so I can give you a shout out in our next videos. And lastly, if you've experienced a terrifying encounter or have a horror story to share, send it to us on Reddit. And if you want to support the channel and help us create even more spine-chilling content, check out our Patreon or Ko-Fi. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to like and share the video, and now, stay tuned for our next horror episode.